bum 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 bum.
Clap.
Bum 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 bum.
Clap, clap.
Bum 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 bum.
Clap.
Bum bum
Melody.
bum bum.
Clap, clap.
Bum 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 bum.
Clap.
Daily
Clap, clap.
Solutions.
Clap.
Bum 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 bum.
Clap, clap.
Podcast.
Bum bum.
Podcast. Daily Solution Podcast.
Bum bum.
Crash. All right, welcome everybody. This
All
is
right.
Graham.
This is Ashkan.
And today's question is, what are your target demographics?
Yeah. I get this question a lot, not just from inside the float industry, but from outside. Like when you talk to like other business people, this is like one of the first things that people bring up.
I was hanging out with my mom the other day, and she was asking me about my target demographics.
Yeah, I was in the grocery store, just trying to buy some bananas. And
Excuse me, what are your target demographics, sir? So we get it all the time.
yeah, left and right, I mean, it's a weird one because I feel like no one believes me when I answer this question. And I say like, we don't really have demographics in a way that a lot of other businesses do.
Yeah, or at least maybe even in a way that's as immediately actionable or,
Right.
or functional as some other industries.
Or that it's just so wide, like we kind of this like, hey, well, everybody comes and floats for these huge varieties of reasons. And I feel like, especially when you say this, how they're like business people who are not within the float industry, they kind of look at you as very naive. They're like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Like, there's no business that doesn't have demographics.
Yeah, for sure. And I get the same thing. Like usually how I phrase it now when I'm answering, rather than just saying like, well, demographics aren't the most important thing, which used to be my answer in the float industry. Now I say, I get that question a lot before people have opened their centers and almost never from already existing centers. And I think it's kind of the same reason, is that once you open a center, you realize that your demographics are just all over the place, right?
Yeah.
I also like comparing it to a hat store. It's like a classic kind of business saying almost, which is what's the demographic of a hat store? Anyone with a head? Right. But within that, of course, you get to decide what kinds of hats you're selling and who you're actually marketing to. And so that's kind of the case with the float center as well. It's not like you have set demographics of people that specifically ages 28 to 45 who are already doing other pre-existing forms of wellness therapy or going to be your primary customer or something, But for your center, maybe that's the case, right? Like just like a hat store could decide to sell only bowler hats or only
Right.
high-class hats or only ballroom hats or something like that. A float center can kind of decide where their demographics are a little bit more
Yeah.
than a lot of other businesses.
And to me, that's kind of one of the like really beautiful things about running a float center that I appreciate, is that it has this kind of malleability to it, where it's like, hey, who is your demographic? Well, like, who do you want your demographic to be? Like, who do you want to hang out with? Like, and it's cool. Like, you can go around and you see these float centers set up, and they're offering the same thing. It's a float tank in there, and you're getting in the float tank. But the context around it can be so different. We go to places that are, we did that float tour where we went around and to all these different centers, and we saw everything from like really nice high-end spas to gyms, with float tanks in them, to like an MMA gym with a room in the back and a float tank, and a colon hydrotherapy clinic with a float tank, and there's an art gallery out there with a float tank in it. And it's amazing, like the wide span of places you'll find float tanks, and they all make sense. Like, you think about a float tank in all those different contexts, and every time you kind of nod your head, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. I could see a float tank in there. But those are like vastly different places from one another.
Yeah, and again, I guess for each of those too, like that place might have a target demographic, right? Like the
Right.
float tank in a gym, their target demographic might be people who have just finished a workout, or people like an hour before they're going in to do a heavy workout, or whatever it is, But like people already working out, or maybe they decide, no, like our float tank is an intro to getting gym membership, so they're reaching for people who like do yoga and don't go to the gym, and they're like, that's their target demographic that they're trying to aim for, so that they can convert them into gym members or something.
Right.
Right, but the point, I guess, is that's a specific target demographic for that float center, not for floating overall. And floating overall, again, it's like if you go back to just what's the demographic of overall floating, it seems much more impossible to define, in a way that when you target an exact individual center, you can kind of pin it down a little bit more.
And, it means too, even within your own float center, you have the option of kind of reaching out to more specific demographics. I mean, this is one thing that we do a lot at Float On with our marketing, is our center itself is a little bit more generic, I guess. I mean, it's definitely not things. Like it's not a high-end spa necessarily. Like we don't have really that feel going on. I mean, if you haven't been to our place, there's like bright yellow walls and crazy ornamental desks. And I think Graham describes it as a chic children's playroom.
That is how I describe it, yeah.
I think it's like kind of the best description. So, we're not like just completely a blank canvas or anything, but still it's not like specifically like an athletic setup in our shop or anything. But if we want to reach out to athletes, what we do is we set up specific programs where we like actually do outreach to those athletic groups, and we do it with these kind of custom-made programs for them. And we've done that for artists and musicians, and we talk about this I think on a couple of episodes, so I won't go into all the details. But through those kind of individual forms of reach out, we manage to have a little bit more kind of laser focus with those demographic groups that we're trying to pull in. But doesn't mean we have to like necessarily set up our whole shop differently or just specifically restrict ourselves to kind of one group of people.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of what we found works really well too. Like even though floating kind of does appeal to everybody, there is this again, it's like running a hat store. Everybody has a head. There's a reason for almost everyone to float who doesn't have a water phobia or something like that. And, given that, though, if you try to just go out there and market that, if you try to go and put up billboards or even Facebook ads and just say, floating is good for everything, or even like list them off, you're like, it's good for pain management and pregnancy and all these different things, I think you end up, it's like the old saying, if you try to stand for everything, you end up standing for nothing, right? Mm-hmm. And same with floating. So even though it can appeal to such a wide base, like just getting out there and choosing which target market you are going to hit and hitting it hard for 3 or 4 months or longer. In the case of something like marathon runners, you might sponsor every marathon that happens in your city for the next 4 months and reach out to all of the marathon bloggers and ultra marathon runners and actually try to get them in for free floats, and the people who are organizing the different marathons, and try to get the organizers in, and just like hit that one market really hard. And it's not saying that marathon runners are the only market you could hit, but as long as you choose one and you focus some attention there and really make sure that demographic is aware of a lot of the benefits that are going into what they do specifically, I think that would be considered a good use of demographics and of kind of targeting them.
So I guess all this being said, we have looked into our like data a little bit on our own kind of back end.
A fair amount, yeah.
To see if we're just making all this up in our heads, or if there is actually some evidence in kind of the people coming in to float with us that matches this. And there's some stuff in there obviously that there's not like a flood of 5-year-olds coming in to float with us or anything like that. Like we're not completely just taking a perfect representation of the population or anything, but even across age, it seemed pretty spread out. I mean, it really seemed like maybe like late 30s, early 40, or like beginning of your 30s to mid 40s was kind of the biggest swell. But even that it was not like a super big hump or anything right there.
Yeah, and the age range spread is really interesting. Like if you look at demographics in Portland for the ages at which people are active and have disposable income, it lines up pretty much exactly with our spread of ages. So like if it's like the people who are going out and doing things, like that is our age range. And the interests also are all over the place. Even with our members, like even if you're like, okay, well maybe for your generalized population coming into float, you can't say that there's a specific demographic, but what about for your most regular floaters, like the people who are getting in there and using it once a week or more, right? Is there any commonality between them? And I would say disposable income is probably the commonality. But we took our best members out for drinks and actually just pick their brain and do some kind of customer interviews with them. And it was all over the place, from a retired couple who just wanted to come in and float for aches and pains, to a computer programmer who floated many times a week just because he was either up late or up early and he's sitting at his computer all the time, to a guy who worked in the lumber industry and he came in to float and was trying to get all of his friends to float because he was so good on his body when he was doing all of this crazy mill work with trees, to someone who was a translator and like just translating languages was another one of our members who was coming in the most regular. And it's like across professions, across gender, across age ranges, it was really hard to pin it down and say what made these members want to come in, other than it really helped them personally, either mentally or physically, for some reason. There wasn't this immense amount of commonality between them like you might expect to find.
And we looked at gender as well, kind of went back through our schedule and tried to see if there was like, what percentage was male versus female. And pretty much over the sample we looked at, I think it was 51% female,
Male.
51% male, 49% female.
Not that it's statistically
Yeah.
significant. I
And
mean,
it was
could
just
have
of the
gone
sample
either
time that
direction.
we took. So I mean, like we came out of that kind of with the even split is pretty much the lesson I took from that.
Yeah, it was about a 6-month running average of all of
Uh-huh.
our appointments. And we do about 1,200 to 1,300 appointments a month. So it's a fair sampling of people coming in. And yeah, 51% men, 49% women. So there's the kind of interesting news about demographics. We might not have convinced you. You might still, almost no one that I have this conversation with is convinced until they open a float center that demographics aren't something they should really be focusing on ahead of time. But there you have it, straight from the float-on's mouth.
All right, excellent. Well, if you guys have any further questions, you can, of course, always submit them to us at floattanksolutions.com/podcast, and we will talk to you tomorrow.
See you guys later.